On April the 17th, 2025, I set sail from Singapore on a luxury cruise ship, travelling nearly 15,000 nautical miles over 61 days to Barcelona. I'd taken on a freelance role as a guest lecturer, giving talks to passengers about the art and craft of photography. When I wasn't speaking, I was mostly making photographs as we drifted across the ocean, stopping at ports along the way. I've been doing this on and off for about 7 years, and while the artificial environment of the ship can be challenging, it also continues to fascinate me. The experience has quietly influenced how I work. It has shaped the way I see and the kinds of photographs that I make. As I drift through the world on a ship, time seems to shift in a peculiar way, taking on an almost existential quality. The travel feels both fast and slow. The ship moves slowly and steadily across the globe, but the experiences are fleeting, transitory, and fragmented. This odd environment and sense of dislocation is weirdly seductive and informs my practice. I am drawn to the idea of the non-place, a term coined by anthropologist Marc Augé to describe transient functional spaces such as airports, motorways, and hotels, spaces that don't really hold identity. Perhaps the cruise ship is the ultimate non-place, a floating hotel with no fixed address. A fantasy world, disconnected from geography, circling the world's oceans. While Marc Augé's ideas of the non-place underpin much of my work, I am also interested in how passengers encounter the world, typically through the tinted windows of a coach. For that, I turned to the sociologist John Urry, who wrote about the tourist gaze, exploring the idea that tourism doesn't just show us places, it shapes how we see them. It tells us what's worth photographing and when to move on. According to Urry, travel becomes less about discovery and more about consuming manicured experiences. Cruise ships are the perfect example. Everything is curated, from the guided tours to the themed party nights. Passengers arrive somewhere new, take a photo of what they're supposed to, buy a fridge magnet, and get back on board before the buffet. In my onboard lectures, I try gently to push back against the typical cruise narrative. I encourage passengers to slow down, to look, to notice more than just what's on the itinerary, in the hope that maybe it helps them connect with the world in a more meaningful way. Sometimes it does. But perhaps it is just a form of damage control. Cruise tourism, for all its comfort and convenience, leaves a heavy footprint on the environment, on local cultures, and even on the idea of what travel means. And I am part of it. Reconciling the sustainability of my activities is something I grapple with. And whatever I say in my talks about mindful seeing and being an ethical traveller, I still get on a flight, board the ship, and take the gig. Maybe encouraging people to look more closely is just a way to make my complicity feel more palatable. Either way, I keep photographing, trying to make sense of it from the inside. For this work in progress, titled A Message from the Bridge, I am interested in exploring the unglamorous stuff. I'm intrigued by the passenger experience, their connection with the ship, with each other, with the crew, with the local people, and with the topographies they fleetingly visit. There is a bizarre, sometimes absurd quality to it all. Passengers are dropped into unfamiliar places for a few hours, then returned to the comfort of the ship. Rituals become photo opportunities, landscapes become backdrops, the extraordinary becomes routine, everything is curated, but it's just a facade, a surreal theatre. I am also drawn to photograph what goes on in the in-between, liminal places of the locations I visit. So that's where I look too, seeking images in banal, unnoticed corners of the globe. In a sense, I also occupy an in-between place in the ship's nuanced social order. I am not crew and I cannot access crew areas. I have passenger status, but I am not part of that tribe either. There's a certain solitude to this liminal social status that I find strangely appealing. The sense of detached isolation in part informs the stark, almost lonely aesthetic I have developed. It has also led me to experiment with the idea of incorporating text alongside the images. At first, I used fragments of diaristic writing, passing thoughts, and small observations, random vignettes, taking inspiration from practitioners such as Matilda Sayers Rasmussen's body of work titled Unprofessional. But I gradually shifted from my personal diaristic notes to using found and appropriated text instead. Snippets from onboard signage, menus, and safety notices, bits of marketing copy and observations from online cruise forums. Removed from their original context and paired with the photographs, the words take on a different tone, detached, slightly absurd, and maybe even a little poetic. My methodology is straightforward. One camera, one focal length, the occasional flash to deal with unpredictable light, but all framed with a deadpan gaze. UK-based photographer Martin Parr's lifelong study of the leisure industry is an obvious point of reference, but it is perhaps the more quietly spoken work of practitioners such as Italian photographer Luigi Urry, who have made a bigger impact on me and the way I engage with these environments through photography. If I'm not being chaperoned on a coach tour with fellow guests, I simply wander aimlessly in the ports, trying to see beyond the tourist gaze. Travel writers such as Bruce Chatwin and Jeff Dyer have also informed my way of looking. Dyer's White Sands, in particular, captures the contradictions of travel in a way that resonates with me. I originally conceived this work in progress as a set of postcards, but I soon abandoned the idea in favour of a small zine. A zine felt closer to the vibe I was after, something you could hold in your hands and flick through. But as the project developed, it became clear I'd gathered far more material than I'd first imagined. From this trip alone, there's enough to think seriously about making a small book, and especially if I weave in work from earlier voyages. A book feels like a more sustainable long-term strategy and a way to bring several years' worth of work together. I don't know if I'll have another trip. The bookings are wildly unpredictable and completely unreliable. I generally assume there will be no more assignments. Who knows? I think I've seen enough. For now, the work remains in motion, a bit like the journeys that shaped it.